All right, we are live on the interwebs and in person. So welcome everyone to Uranus Comics reading, organized by our beloved friend Carlo Quispe. Give it up. My name is Greg Newton. I'm co-founder, along with my partner Don Gilcom, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the space you find yourselves in right now. So the Bureau, we like to say, is a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. And this is the service that we provide, holding this space for queer culture. We are an all-volunteer organization, so we rely on sales and donations to keep this party going. We have a suggested donation of $10, but we ask you to give what we can. And if money is tight and you plan on buying some books or comics, then you should hold on to your money and buy those books and comics. But if you're able to give something, we appreciate it. And there's change in the back. You can also, if you prefer, make a donation at Venmo, just at BGSQD. The letters are all around you, so you can't screw it up. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the register and you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. And without further ado, I did want to read a land acknowledgement before we get started, and then I will introduce them. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We are actively seeking to partner with and provide material support to a local queer Indigenous organization. And we hope to make an announcement about this partnership in the near future. But in the meantime, we encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. So let me introduce Carlo, and we can jump right in. Carlo Quispe is a Peruvian-born, Brooklyn-based queer cartoonist, creator of Uranus Comics, originally published by Printed Matter in 2010. Please welcome Carla.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and I really appreciate you being here. And I'm so grateful for the Bureau to allow me to present these amazing cartoonists that we have in Uranus Comics 3. And we'll be showing a variety of work that may or may not be in the book, okay? Okay, there we go.
I think you have to use this. Yeah. Oh, maybe not.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Okay. Okay. So, I'm a cartoonist living here in New York, and my practice has to do with comics that are about how we survive the how we survive the effects of our economic system and the global power dynamics that we all experience. And our comic also references past eras of comics, and I love do an homage to the cartoonists that I'm influenced by. This one was inspired by Howard Cruz and his comic Wendell. And so to do this comic, I did the Uranus title, but in the style that Howard would do. And in the fantasy, in the comic, my character is dreaming about being with Howard's character named Wendell. So I was able to somehow get my characters to do it in a dream sequence. even though it was published, way before the Uranus comic was done. And my mom is here also to testify that she's the one who threw away my first edition. Okay, and so this is a comic that I have in Uranus #3. And this comic deals with my real life sister, who is an essential worker here in New York. And yeah, a lot of my comics have to do with immigrants and low wage workers, workers of color, and other vulnerable communities. So you'll see that reflected in this work. Also, the way that I want to present my sister's story is in a humorous way, which might conflict a little bit with the serious topics that she's dealing with. Here she is at work, having to deal with typical real Americans, and slowly in her job, her tasks multiply, and as the story unfolds, I'm also showing how the numbers of people with COVID are sent to the state health department. That's one of her responsibilities. I've really wanted to kind of show how, even though she's got these multiple responsibilities, she's still able to somehow manage. And the image that first came to mind when she was telling me about her daily routine was that weird Hanna-Barbera octopus that can like play many different instruments, right, all at once. That's basically her there at the bottom, doing more than one person's job. And this is about the middle of the comic. I had to chop it up a little bit, but this is when she gets the news that she herself has contracted COVID, because in her job, she has to go through weekly testing. And so she's only getting the news once she gets home. And I'm not sure about how much detail you can see, but her coat actually has like a print that actually looks like the COVID virus. So she has it. She's wearing it, right? Okay. And as you can see, she has this, happy home life that is like another balance to her work responsibilities, right? But it's, fun stuff, like the toys and the puppy and the playing, right? So I see. So once she gets the news, she immediately puts on her mask at home, and everybody else wears it too. And this was, what happened in her real life. And she did manage to protect them from getting it. But when the new variant came around, and also at the time, they were not doing vaccines for kids less than 5. So at the end, they did get the new variant. Okay, and in this panel, they're getting some free groceries and vegetables, but she's experienced this strange pain back pain that she says like someone is stepping on it, which I thought was like a fascinating kind of turn of events, because here she is supposed to be the one caring for others, and then she has to also be cared for, not even knowing why she's having this kind of pain. But when she told me in the interviews how it was as if someone was stepping on her back, I immediately remembered those kinds of political cartoons when there's one person on the bottom and then someone stepping on them and then someone stepping on that person, right? And so I was thinking about her as, you know, one of many, you know, people in the health field who was, you know, feeling that crunch, right, during the pandemic. And so she is a patient who's been waiting for over an hour, and the people who are getting the actual attention are the people who are screaming and losing it, and also like people who are like in trouble, like in worse trouble. So she asks, hey, do I need to start screaming to get attention? And she thinks to herself, what if I die here? Maybe I should record myself with my phone, which she did do. But that was like a personal video that she only told me about. So what I did was do a kind of interpretation of that moment, right? When she says, I came here to make me sure I'm okay, but I'm scared and no one is coming to see me. And her kids are named Anita and Michael, which are not her real kids' names. I just want to also point out how I've written the word Michael in a phonetic way, which is sometimes the way that Peruvian names are written. They are done to sound like American names, but they actually have this like phonetic spelling. Okay, so you know, kind of like predestination about whether, you know, where their kids are gonna end up, right? And so at the end, they found out that what she was suffering from was a panic attack, like stress, basically. You know, she says, a what attack? You know, they say a panic attack. She's like, a what attack? You know, she's kind of reeling still from the experience, but at the end, yeah, little Anita does not want to get her COVID test. Let's see. And this is the ultimate ending where the new variant comes around and does get them. And then the moral of the story is that now COVID is normal and masks are normal. Yeah, I dedicate this comic to her, and I hope, you know, you get to see this soon. And I'm grateful that she's letting me tell her story. Yeah, that is the feeling. Let's say a little bit about Peru. I'm not sure if you are aware of the news right now. There's like big shift happening, but it's like been like a long way coming, because Peru has been like the country that has like the most COVID deaths, and there, you know, that affects what's happening politically right now, and people are just like at their you know, at the end of their rope. And yeah, and when I do these comics, I also want to talk about like what has happened in other countries in a way to warn people how it could easily also happen here. Okay, that's it for the Isabel story, and I want to tell you a little bit about what Mike and I do together as a collaborative team to put together the Uranus Comics. And we started out doing these comics as a way to get to know each other and through collaborating. When we were, just working together, our friends were able to show this to printed matter, and I'm specifically thinking of Jack. Was instrumental in getting this published back in 2010. So I'm also here to thank you. If it wasn't for you, this wouldn't have happened. Which is also why it's so important for me to have you in Uranus Comics #3. Uranus #0 was a comic that was published along with #1 as kind of like a mini comic that is about the places in Manhattan and all the boroughs actually where you can get tested for HIV and other STDs for free. Okay. And this is Uranus Comics #2. Do you want to talk a little bit about this issue? Well, can you tell me what this is? Okay, because that's your comment.
So, yeah, with the second issue, we were thinking, well, what kind of ways can we even push it further than the first issue? And my comic was about a little girl, and she had a birthday wish. She blows out the candle, and then we see the parents getting killed by a giant pussycat. And she goes in the kitchen and sees a giant cat in there and says, "Oh, my wish came true." But yeah, it was fun coming up with ideas, and really and some of it was like stream of consciousness kind of drawings. And it's really felt to me like my early zine days, what I felt was fun and exciting about doing zines back then. So it was kind of like, I felt like I'd keep it going,
Okay, you remember that?
Oh yeah, we did some giant poster-sized drawings, and those ended up getting reduced down and printed in it.
And that was our studio uptown before we were forcibly removed. We had to sign a document to say that we wouldn't discuss it or whatever. But yeah, our building was bought by this corporate entity, and we ended up having to leave that place after almost 15 years. And when we first, when we were, having to leave, we turned some of the rooms into a space where we could have little gallery shows with our local neighbors, with the local artists in our neighborhood up in Washington Heights. Before we had to go. So these are some of those drawings. It's a little bit hard for me to also determine who did what. It's a little bit difficult. And also, I just recently met with the person who initially published this back in 2010. His name is A.A. Bronson, and he has also a practice of working collaboratively. And when we first presented our work to him, and he wanted to publish it. Now I'm sure that it has as much to do with his practice as it had to do with ours. And our collaborative work, I guess, pulls influence from all of our backgrounds. You can see the Smurfs there, or a formative comic strip, as are Hollywood, monsters, the Universal that looks like a universal monster, like the creature from the Black Lagoon. Okay, take it away, Mike.
So just to talk a second about myself, I was born in upstate New York, and our family moved to Florida when I was 8 years old. So kind of a small town, and growing up as a teenager, like a lot of small towns, maybe the kids feel like there wasn't enough stuff for them to do. This was before the internet. So I started to get into collecting comic books, and the ones that appealed to me were ones like the EC horror comics. They call them the pre-code horror comics. And back then I could find them pretty cheaply at a used bookshop that had a huge basement with just comics. And when you start to go towards the stairway to go down in the basement, you can smell the comics, you know. And it's almost like a drug or something. I would go down there and spend a lot of time, and they were selling them for pretty cheap, you know, 50 cents or $1 sometimes. When I got to be about 14 years old, I discovered Heavy Metal Illustrated magazine. And there was an ad in there to get a grab bag of underground comics. And I heard about the underground comics, but I never actually got a hold of any. So I wrote to, it was called Kitchen Sink Press. And at the time, I didn't realize it was Dennis Kitchen, artist who was running it. And he sent me the grab bag, and I actually had to clip the little thing out and sign it that I was 18 or over, even though I was 14 at the time. So I got the contraband. I opened the envelope, and the top comic on the stack was one that Dennis Kitchen had done the cover for. It was Bizarre Sex. I forget what issue number, but on the cover, there's an image of a big giant penis breaking through the sidewalk, like on a New York City street scene, like it's a monster. And when I started reading these underground comics, I felt like I was already drawing comics myself, and I would pass them around to my friends in school. And I felt like, well, now it's the 80s, so it should even be more radical than the underground comics in the 70s. And I knew I had something called freedom of speech, so I figured, well, I'll go ahead and do that, you know. And I ended up getting in trouble in Florida for my comics. I actually had to go to court and go to jail. One of the things I discovered also when I was living in Florida was a magazine called World War III Illustrated. And I had to drive a ways to the Countryside Mall, which had a bookstore that was kind of like alternative stuff. So that was maybe 30 minutes outside of where I lived. And eventually I started getting published in World War III Illustrated. And this is one of the comics I did for their censorship issue.
I just want to point out that I edited this issue for World War III.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think usually to get in there, you have to be like part of the group, show up to all the meetings and stuff, but I didn't do any of that. I'll just send it in. All right, so I'm going to read this. Also, I can mention this was written, part of it was written by a friend of mine, goes by the name Mike Hunchback. And he was very into like the story of the EC comics and all that. So I knew that he would be able to point out things to me that I didn't know about. Hello, kitties. Hello, kitties. Why don't you pull up that child's torso and have a seat? I have a terrible yarn to tell you. I like to call it no future for censorship. Gaze upon this giant stone monument erected on the moon many ages ago. And on the monument it says, calculated discomfort is a well-known path to the truth. Theodore Sturgeon. The year is 3032. And what we see there is the public library in the future under kind of a glass dome with a couple lion-looking things on each side. This young lad, Zinkex, likes exploring the data stream in the public library. He is startled to find an old black and white film of boys his own age with horror comic books. Just to mention, the old black and white film that he's talking about, that he's seen, was a real film that was made about the dangers of the pre-code horror comics. And in the film, you actually see the kids reading the comics and then they go crazy and start butchering each other. Yeah. They just finished reading the horror comics and now two of the boys have tied the third to a tree. Now they're torturing him. Why was this film made? And then he says, what the hell? Poof. Hi, Zinkex, my boy. I'm Francis Pesty, the ghost of truth from the past. I'm here to teach you about the terrors of censorship. Censorship? What's that? Censorship used to be a common thing on this planet of ours. Let me take you to some points in history that your search might have missed. First, we go to China in the 1700s. The Qianlong Emperor, not sure if I get all the pronunciations right, but Qianlong Emperor obsessively spearheaded the largest book burning in history to prevent any option, any opinion of even remote dissent from the empire. If an author wanted to inquire as to what the problem was, as 53 authors had done, they were mutilated, beheaded, and sliced into little tiny pieces. Yep. Golly. Of course, Adolf Hitler was a fan of censorship. He burned anything that didn't align with the Nazi philosophy, including the works of Hemingway, Kafka, Einstein, Brecht. Then there were the McCarthy hearings. These hearings led up to the Senate subcommittee hearing on comics. Let me introduce William M. Gaines. He conceived such titles as The Crypt of Terror, The Vault of Horror, and Panic. Now he is forced to defend himself and the comic books he published. And we see William Gaines there in court. I was the first publisher in these United States to publish horror comics. I'm responsible. I started them. Some may not like them. That's a matter of personal taste. It would be just as difficult to explain the harmless thrill of a horror story to Dr. Wortham as it would be to explain the sublimity of a love to a frigid old maid. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of our own children? Do we forget that they are citizens too and entitled to the essential freedom to read? Or do we think our children are so evil, so vicious, so simple-minded that it takes but a comic magazine story of murder to set them to murder, a story of robbery to set them to robbery? And where this was taken from, this particular dialogue was actually, they have it on film, him reading this at the hearing. And now we see in court where they actually had some panels from the comics for people to gasp at. Gasp! Good Lord, choke. No! The subcommittee did not technically win, but they got exactly what they wanted. Comic publishers who should have held the power as a legitimate majority bent to the will of the subcommittee and created the comic book code. Thousands of artists, publishers, and printers were put out of work. The areas of comics that were vivid and creative were promptly squashed into fare so tepid that kids could tell instantly that these comics suck. They had none of the good gore and stuff like before. Schools and churches around USA held massive comic books. So the young ZX is there and he sees all the comics being burned. And he says, I must save some of the comic books. He goes and grabs a stack of comics and runs with it. Hey, you rat, those are my comics. Those are for burning now. Give them back, you bum. Says the kid with the propeller hat. So he runs, he figures he'll hide him in his treehouse. I will hide them in his treehouse. He gets up there and he sees there's another kid up there reading horror comics. Ah, startles him. And then he gives them to the kid. He says, take good care of these, pal. So now the ghost is with him flying over, looking at the burning comics. Oh, piss on it all. Time to take you back home. That piss on it all is something my grandmother used to say. She'd say, ah, piss on him. Just piss on him. You know, Then in the late 60s, a new group of artists emerged that ignored the comic book code. They created what would be known as underground comics. Countless titles were sold. And we see under him there some of the comic titles: Zap, Slow Death, Insect Fear. I had a lot of favorites. Even in the 1990s, censorship was alive. In '93, a cartoonist named Mike Diana, living in Florida, was charged with 3 counts of obscenity for his comic zine called Boiled Angel. Mike pleaded not guilty, and with the help of a group called the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, he obtained a First Amendment lawyer. During this trial, a number of so-called expert witnesses testified for the prosecution. They set out to prove that Boiled Angel cannot be considered as real art, therefore unprotected by the First Amendment. After a 4-day jury trial, he was found guilty and sent to jail in handcuffs from the courthouse. So unfortunately, that part was all true. After 4 days in jail, he was returned to the judge for sentencing. Mike was given a long list of probation requirements to follow for 3 years. He had to pay a $3,000 fine and do 8 hours of community service work each week. He was also prohibited from drawing, and police were allowed searches without a warrant. And just to go a little further on that, my lawyer told me that the judge, as part of sentencing, said I was even limited on the number of art supplies I could have, pencils and stuff. And I actually never totally quit drawing. I started doing paintings instead, and I would keep them hidden in the trunk of my car. and then sneak them upstairs at like 2 a.m. to work on them. Well, I have to go now. Just be glad you live in this amazing censorship-free future of ours. Bye, Zindex, and goodbye to you kiddies out there. Oof, and he's gone. Thanks, everyone.
Maybe not. And next, we're going to have Jack Waters. And I'm so happy that Jack is here presenting his comics. He is known for being a performer, a dancer, an actor, and he also runs incredible community organizations like Allied Productions and Le Petit Versailles, which is a community garden on the Lower Side.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm so happy that after working with Jack to also learn performance and work in theater, now Jack is working in comics. His new work is called Pestilence.
Pestilence Comics.
Why is it doing
And
this?
the comic that he's did, that's it. The one that he did for World War III, I'm sorry, Uranus Comics #3 is called The Attack of the Murder Robots.
Murder Robots.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it's easy for me to say World War III as easily as I say Uranus 3, because we are all also cartoonists who have worked for World War III Illustrated, and consider it an inspiration. Thank you, Janet. Take it away.
Yeah, it's kind of like a big family, because I do, and one of the members of the Petit Versailles Garden, which ended up when Mike moved to New York, was your community service.
Nice.
And your hard labor was drawing comics.
I think when you said when you called them and they said to you, well, do you know him? Is he a friend of yours? And you were kind of like, what? And they're like, because he can't be a friend.
Guilt by association. So Carlo, we know each other for many, many years. We've done a lot of projects together. It's like all of the stuff we did at Mix NYC, where you did so many amazing murals.
Yeah, I consider it my post-grad.
And we traveled together. I was actually talking to someone about our project at CCCB, Centro Contemporáneo Cultural de Barcelona. And when we went, we were doing a project which was this museum in Barcelona's first World AIDS Day.
Back in 2005.
Yeah, 2005. And our goal was to see what kind of diaspora among the Latino international community was. And Carlo was, part of our group. We did all kinds of zines and books, we did videos, we did a performance. What was it? The English name was Seesaw. So this, I'm just so amazed to work with Carlo. I'd never worked with comics, and Carlo is a comic artist and is very much my mentor. And especially with developing this comic series for a project that I'm doing called Pestilence. It has like a sub-project, which are comic books. But Carlo asked me to do the back cover for Uranus 3. And it was happening during the summer of 2020, where there was the lockdown. And the garden, we do lots of performances and films and talks and music and dancing. It's very busy. And so even though robins had nested there for as long as it's been there, I never realized how vicious robins were until that year, because I'm sure other people have had this experience that when there are no people around, like paving paradise, as Johnny Mitchell wrote, nature just takes over. And in fact, the virus itself was one of the things that made New York a quiet place for a long time. So we weren't allowed to have the public in the garden for that period. And so my partner Peter and I were doing our art project. You know, we were gardening, and then I was working on a project that was related to pestilence, and Peter was working on projects. And there were the robins, and they were really friendly and bird-like. So it was interesting because they had never come close to us. But at that point, like there was this robin. Can I advance this by pushing the space button? Forward. Oh, forward. So this is the whole sheet. It's the back public. I mean the back cover, and this is the garden. This part, you know, this is one of the projects that Peter was doing, and this was really the notorious spot where the crimes happened in many ways, because we have a milk crate that we use to hold the speaker or whatever we might have in the garden. And so, you know, we're sitting there and we're working, and, you know, we're really happy because, you know, it was locked down, and the garden has a fence on both the house and street side and the second street side, so we could see people, so it wasn't as isolated as it would have been if we were literally locked in our apartment. And you know, so I'm like working on my project. It was a mold of a spider that was part of the pestilence performance, and I'm saying, at least we can make art outside. And then Peter's looking at the robin and noticing that this robin is going crazy. And we have mirrors in the garden. And so the robin like saw its reflection, and it's like jumping up and down and fluttering its wings. And it's just, you know, it looked like it was, why is it attacking its own reflection? So, you know, we kind of looked at it. And then we thought, well, maybe it thinks it's another robin and it's a mating dance. And we know robins well enough to tell like male from female. It was definitely a male robin, and Peter's ha ha ha. Then it's a gay robin if it thinks it's courting another man. So, you know, we're like, great, you know, we know that like many species are queer. And so this was a gay robin. It thought its reflection was another male, and it was doing some mating dance. But then we watched longer and we saw that, oh, it's collecting twigs. I just happen to be wearing a t-shirt that Carlo made that has foot on the front of it. That's what I don't know what I was wearing that day, but I just thought it would be funny to put it into the comic that you asked me to do. And you know, we said, I think it's building a nest. And then Peter spots another one. He says, look, there's another one. So then we have the realization, oh, it's a female. And then we go over to the milk crate and we see that the robin has been building a nest, and he's coming right by us. You know, he's cautious, but like he's coming close enough that it's really no problem. And we say, oh, she's going to lay eggs. And so, you know, we watched them build the nest. You know, a few days later, she did lay eggs, and we knew enough to like say, you can look, but don't touch the nest, because they say if you touch a bird's nest, then it will reject it, and then the eggs will just perish. And Peter's like, I know. Oh. So, like, at a certain point, everything changed. Like the robins were letting us get very close to them. Wait, let me make sure I didn't miss a slide. Yeah, so everything changed. And the robin's in the tree, you know, he's just kind of like watching us work, but then sometimes he comes close to us. But at this point, he was really taking what ended up being a defensive position. And then it flies by and it like pecks me right on the back of my head. I'm like, ow. So, at that point, the robin would kind of like, in the beginning, it would sort of buzz us. And then it would come closer and closer as it buzzed. But then at a certain point, it would come right for our eyes. So we're like, oh, who knew these things could be so aggressive? And we figured out they're defending their young. So from that point on, we had to wear sheets or blankets. We wore big hats to cover ourselves and protect our heads. So at a certain point, the robin was just so violent and so aggressive. We realized that, okay, like this is the Earth. We're just one species on it. I did some research and I looked enough to see that the robins they are always territorial, but when there's a lot of people around, they can't really act it out as much as when they're in the majority and it's just us. So we just gave it up to them and I was done. We were like, let them have the garden, at least until the fledglings leave the nest. Because I read that once the birds are able to fly, then they become less protective because then the chicks can take care of themselves. And I realized that nature has a way of reclaiming its own, where the virus and the robins were in cahoots. So we decided we're going to look at the next species that becomes, this is also what we were talking about with the person that was visiting about this idea of invasive species. And we think about other species invading us and not realizing we're the invasive species. So thanks, Carlo. What you got? What have we done?
Okay. Next up, we're gonna have Katie Fricas. And so you can also check out her comic Checked Out. That's right by the register. And that's a comic that's coming up in the future through Monforte, which is a Canadian publisher. Okay.
Sorry, 1 second.
I'm so happy that Katie was able to be a part of this comic, and I have actually been wanting Katie in Uranus Comics since the second issue, and that was also a time when it was like a period of time where I had to be moving, and I ended up not being able to include Katie in issue number 2. And some, actually maybe like the most important reason to do Uranus Comics 3 was to be in the same comic with Katie. So it definitely, sometimes things that may seem like, something didn't work out is actually, something that is actually gonna be the reason why something else gets created, so you never know. You never know how things are gonna work out. And also, when I had to move to Brooklyn, I ended up moving near Katie and also Jen, and so we are, also representing Brooklyn with this comic. Okay, take it away, Kate.
Okay. Hi, I'm Katie. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks Bureau for having us. Thank you Carlo and Mike. Okay, here we go. So I'm gonna read 2 things tonight. The first one is my comic in Uranus. It's called Heart to Heart, and I was really glad that everything aligned with the date because it's about Valentine's Day. So this was just a mere 3 years ago. It goes like this. On Valentine's Day 2020, I saw a bunch of cool people perform at the Bowery Electric. One of them was actually Pamela Sneed, who sang Hound Dog, and I'll just never recover from that. I followed my friend after the show, who was one of the cool people, to a back room where everyone in the show had their stuff piled up on the 3 sofas, and someone stepped out of their underwear and left it on the rug like this. Approximately 6 weeks later, on my living room floor, I heard someone I knew got the virus and died. I felt rage, then despair. I started to stockpile my most luxurious objects. I drooped, packed a suitcase to nowhere. I cleaned. When I needed air, I went to visit an empty Coney Island, rides hiding, my fingers frozen in my pockets. Oops. Ooh, okay. By June, we congregated. I was scared to see so many people in one place and comforted because I missed them. And this is Cayenne Dorishow speaking on the steps of the Brooklyn Museum for the Brooklyn, I guess it was the Brooklyn Liberation March for Black Trans Lives. And that was pretty amazing. I think that Cayenne of Glitz is working on restoring and preserving Reese Beach right now, so that's something to look into. And that's actually where the next slide takes place. The beach was still packed that summer. I grew a long beard. Listened to the sounds of the city. Helicopters, sirens, fireworks, the delicate tinkle of my oil diffuser. When I couldn't sleep, I wondered where the turtles who lived in the park went in the winter. I found out. I'll tell you later if you want to know. Then February came again, and Valentine's Day. I opened my windows to let the snow come in and cover me like Parmesan. It felt like love. So that was my comic for Uranus, and as bad as it all was and is, like, I just think we should all keep making art about the pandemic because it's going to be sliding into, like, nothingness as we try to cover up all the wrongdoings that went down. So I was also happy to be in this anthology for that reason. So next I thought I would just use a bit of time to read from this book in progress I'm working on. It's called Checked Out. It's about a big lesbian in New York City who is trying to write a book and can't. It's totally fiction. Okay, so Checked Out, in which the author, a queer cartoonist and library worker, searches for love online, artistic validation in New York City, and the perfect book. So at the beginning, our heroine, her name is Louise, and she works at a shoe store. This is before she gets a job at a library, where she works and tries to write her book. So here she is closing up the shoe store. And she pulls the gate. Part 1's called The Age of Innocence. I was trying to write an epic graphic novel. It wasn't going well. The graphic novel was based on the true story of a pigeon named Cherami. Cherami rescued a battalion of US Army soldiers trapped at the bottom of a ravine in World War I. Set in 1918, the final year of the war and Cherami's life, my book followed a group of birds newly recruited to the U.S. Army's 308th Infantry Regiment, 77th Division. There he is. The 77th Division, later known as the Lost Battalion, had been in combat for 68 days when both friendly fire and heavy shelling from the enemy forced them to take cover deep in the Argonne Forest. Tasked with the safe delivery of the 77th Division's location to battalion headquarters, Cherami navigated a bullet-ridden sky, delivered the message that resulted in the battalion's rescue, died, and was posthumously awarded the French Croix de Guerre for his bravery. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I lost sleep thinking about the ghastly details of the war. Cackling machine guns, stifling mustard gas, biting barbed wire, trenches oozing. At night, my sketchbook and I lay side by side in bed, not touching. So now she's back at the shoe store. If you measured time in tattoos, then Wanda and I had both worked at the shoe store for far too long. So Wanda says, "Here's a good job for you, nerd. Library page." And then this customer goes, "Excuse me." Basically it says, all you have to do is shelf books and give tours. "Excuse me, I'll handle this. You apply for the job." Wanda only had 2 tattoos when she started working at the shoe store. They multiplied till she was fully illustrated. "Will you feel my toe?" "No." "Do you still want me to cut your hair tonight after work?" "For sure." My favorite of Wanda's tattoos was the eagle seizing a skull on the desert floor on her belly. Sometimes after work, she let me see it. If the library did call me to come in for an interview and eventually hired me, it wasn't going to be hard to quit the shoe store, but it was going to be hard to quit Wanda. So here's Louise out on the train, and she's going, "Oh, Wanda, Wanda," who shoved her tongue down my throat in one of the sparkly red vinyl booths at the back of the egret and put her hand up my shirt in the middle of East 12th Street between Avenues A and B on the 4th of July. So this is one of those pages that's very much in progress, and the next one's all messed up, so, yeah. And then she goes, "Oh, Wanda, my shoe store lover who said kissing on a bridge didn't count as cheating. Wanda." She did say that. "Wanda, who used to fall asleep standing up at the register, whose boyfriend Graham picked her up all the time from work, then later became her husband right in front of me." So Wanda's like, "Guess what? I got married this weekend." I once drunkenly told Wanda I was in love with her outside of the Mars bar, and she said, "Aw, buddy, no you're not." So Louise does get the interview, and then so this is just a little more I'll read it. She's going to the Upper East Side to this fancy library to see about getting a job. On the Upper East Side, the sidewalks are double wide, there's a trash can on every corner, and you never have to open your own doors. From the outside, the library appeared to look like a museum or embassy, but once indoors, the redolence of thousands of books was apparent, which I haven't written that part yet. All right. She's going on the stairs going in, she's going, "I'm getting notes of bergamot, amber, musk, a touch of sweetness, mildew, the tang of thyme. Can you move?" So then she goes in and approaches the circulation desk. "I'm here to meet with Quentin. You can wait in the reference room." And here comes Quentin. "Louise." Quentin leads me up a grand staircase lined with frowning people who have been sitting too long for their portraits. We pass a children's library. This is Courtney. Hi, Court. And a book bindery. A book bindery. Actually, it's a conservation studio. So then Quentin says, "Right this way, Louise. So, your resume says you're an artist. What brings you to the library?" "Well, believe it or not, cartooning doesn't always pay the bills. Also, I love libraries. I mean, I love cartooning too, but work comes first." The moment I said it, I knew it was a lie. "That's great. Everyone who works here loves libraries. We have to, since the salaries are not very competitive. But there are plenty of perks, including unfettered access to our collection." So on the way out, Quentin and I board a tiny elevator at the back of the building with a gold gate that slams itself shut. Watch your fingers. This is fiction, A through K. One thing we brag about a lot here is our famous members like Herman Melville, Edward Gorey, and Joan Didion. Wow, Didion? Didion. There's Didion. Let's see, do you have anything else to ask me? And then Louise says, yes, what's your section on World War I like? What an odd question. Why don't you sneak down to the stacks and see it on your way out? We'll call you very soon, thank you. So then she tippy-toes down and just has like a moment of ecstasy. Somebody told me to change that to a smile there, so that's what that'll be in the book.
Sniffing and touching and
I exited the library afloat and landed softly on the sidewalk, past the Greek consulate next door, and decided then and there I'd return to work at the library on Monday, whether they hired me or not. All right, so look for that in 2024.
Thank you, Katie. You're amazing. So happy to have Katie in the comic. And next, we're gonna see the comic by Ivan Monforte. And you know, Ivan, when I try to think of how to describe you as an artist, I'm at a loss for words because I've just known you, I suppose, as a photographer and as a video maker, and also, would you say conceptual artist? Yeah, and I'm just so honored to have you in the comic. I feel like I've learned so much from you every time I talk to you, and thank you. Thanks so much for your honesty.
That's sweet, thank you. Yeah, so I'm actually not a comic. I'm trained as an artist, but I have a long history with comics and graphic novels. A little biography about me, which is in the comic in Uranus, is I was born in Mérida, Yucatan, which is the sort of peninsular part of Mexico, highly indigenous, highly Mayan. I'm mixed, or I'm a product of two mixes. Each of my parents had a white parent and a Mayan parent. So I grew up with three languages. My parents spoke Mayan when they wanted to keep things from us. We spoke English when we wanted to keep things away from our parents. And the bridge language was Spanish. And so one of the things that I learned early on as a sort of art student, I initially didn't want to be an artist, I wanted to be a veterinarian. And I started out as sort of like pursuing a science sort of degree, right? But then quickly I realized I was not interested in the inside of animals. I was actually interested in behavior. And animal behavioral science hadn't been invented yet as a sort of science. But one of the things that I really listened to early on in my education is art doesn't pay the bills, right? And my teachers would say, like, I'm here teaching, right? Like, I'm not living off my art. And the reality is very few people get to enjoy making art as a way to make money. So what I've done for the last 18 years is really dedicated my life to working with poor people, particularly around HIV. So I grew up with like extreme privilege to a certain extent. Financially, I grew up in poverty. It's like one of 6 kids. We grew up in a basement apartment, really overcrowded. So the first gay person I met, I was about 4 or 5, and we were actually housing him. And I was a really expressive young person in that, like, I asked my mom, who's this person and why is he living with us? And so she explained to me that he was gay. And so I asked, well, what's gay? And she said, it's when a boy loves another boy. Some people think it's wrong, but it's completely natural. So we're gonna take care of him until he's on his feet, and then he's gonna leave, I promise. So my issue with him was that he was living with us, right? Like taking up our resources, which we didn't have much, right? But for me, sort of social work is more of a philosophy to a certain extent. I was raised to take care of people. It's something that comes very naturally to me. The first person I met living with HIV, I was 10 in 1983. We met him, there wasn't HIV, it was gay cancer. And we knew cancer as something that wasn't contagious, that was something that people get and very tragic. Like my grandmother died of cancer before I was born. So I heard lots of stories about cancer. So there was no stigma when he came. My mom's a seamstress, and the person I met was one of her clients. And he looked really sick. But because we understood it as a cancer, like there was none of that sort of nonsense about like plastic plates or bleaching or all that dumb stuff. Like we still hugged him. He was still part of like, you know, our family in that sense. So this image is an image of me doing a presentation at the Department of Health when I was a volunteer. I now currently work at the Department of Health as a trainer, basically teaching classes to people that work with people about things like HIV, hepatitis, and sexually transmitted infections. And so what happens is sort of these sort of themes are kind of woven into the work. And so I'm just going to give a brief sort of presentation about other works. So this is a project called There But For the Grace of God Go I started it in 2006 in the Bronx in a show about disco. And so my response to the exhibition was to talk about HIV, because disco is sort of the era of transmission, silent transmission, right? So what I call like the elephant in the room, right? That no one sort of knew about. And so what the project consists of is, I'm sort of a conceptual artist. That's sort of the way I'm sort of looked at and written about. Sometimes I'm looked at as a Latino, Latinx artist. Sometimes I'm seen as a queer artist. But really, like, my heart is like, I'm an artist. But because of the sort of initial desire to be a scientist, conceptual art makes the most sense to me as a practice, because it's essentially almost like a science experiment. Like you postulate an idea, you do it, and then you see what it results like, right? And you can repeat it. So this project involves getting a local organization to come into the gallery and do HIV testing on site. And so it's a performance where basically, so this is a room at the Elizabeth Foundation. And this was done in 2018. And so as people are looking at art, I invite them to participate in the performance, which is a free confidential HIV test. And so when I first did it, I actually got kicked out. Like, well, a security guard came in, she saw the sign outside and said, "This is inappropriate," and stopped it. And one of the things that I've really explored is stigma. Stigma, I think, is really interesting because it sort of looks at what is acceptable and not acceptable in society. And these things shift over time. And we see it now, right? We see both things opening and closing at the same time, particularly if you look at trans people and what's going on politically, right? But my really true love is photography. That's how I sort of started. I was sort of an advanced kid. I sort of entered the gay world when I was 14. And I used to go to places like this and get kicked out. Because usually spaces like this are for people 18 and older, right? Because of the sort of high sexuality. And so as a kid, like I really looked at things like Tom of Finland, George Quaintance, like the Han, as a teenager, right? But my first love was photographers like Mapplethorpe, Dwayne Michaels, Peter Hujar, and I really loved portraits, like people. So this is a portrait of a friend of mine, Marquise Wilson, who is actually, I think, the first trans person, he's an actor, to be in a sort of national program. He was in Law and Order. Yeah. And then I tend to work over long periods of time. Like I'll have an idea and then just kind of work on it the rest of my life, so to speak, right? Or as long as I'm alive. So I've been looking at this, I've been doing this project around tattoos. And so I've been doing portraits of men, cis and trans, who are tattooed. And I sort of shifted over time. So now I'm starting to photograph people and their children. So this is a portrait of a friend of mine, Aaron, and his son, Nachal. So comics and graphic novels have been a part of my life since I was really small. So these are known as like novellas. They're graphic novels essentially, and they tend to be sort of highly sexual, highly thematic. There's always sort of like this stuff going on, but there's always sort of this love, romance theme that goes through them. And so I remember going through these when I was a little kid. And so, although I do love to draw, this is a soft ground etching that I made in 2002, I think, of a porn star named Bad Boy, who was on latinboys.com. And so, although I do love to draw, the way I've negotiated comics has been through photography and through collage. And so what I do is I essentially photograph, then photocopy, so it looks like a drawing, and then create an object out of it. So this is a comic I made in '96. There's a character that I've been doing named Dolores Fuertes, which in Spanish is like a pun. It means strong pains. And so she's always going through something, and always crying, right? And the way this was born is when I was trying to switch from biology to something else, I started taking these creative writing classes to kind of find my niche. And the way the class would work is we would submit our writings, and then someone would read it but not know who the author was. And what was happening with my writing is that I was consistently read as a woman. So when they would discuss my writing, they would say, well, she's doing this, she's saying that, she's saying that. And it always was like the gag when they're like, oh, who wrote this? And I'd be like, I did. And so what I started doing was trying to see what would happen if I sort of took the writing and made it real, right? Like created this sort of character, this woman character, right? And so that's me. And one of the things that I wanted to happen is to talk about love and tragedy, but not as sort of like sad and pitiful, but as sort of like a position of sort of strength. So in this comic, she says, I was minding my own business when all of a sudden I felt, when I heard his voice calling my name, and turned to see him there standing with an outstretched hand, then felt the pressure of his hand holding mine and the soft caress of his voice. But for the first time in years, I did not feel any butterflies, just the weight of my feet on the ground, right? So it's this sort of place of like maturity, or it's like you find yourself, right? Sometimes through the tragedy of love and breakups. And so this is one that I did in 2014, Always the Last to Know, right? And so I do have this sort of long history with sort of pornography too, right? Or explicit stuff. Like I've been looking at like Tom of Finland since I was like 15, 16. And it has been sort of part of my practice. So just FYI, there's gonna be some explicit images coming up. Yeah, so that's me. I did a book, so I started doing books. Usually they were just single pages, and they functioned as a metaphor. They're printed on newsprint. So the idea is if you put it on the wall, the sort of environment will eventually destroy it. But if you put it away, say in a book, it'll stay fresh. And it's also sort of a metaphor with the way we deal with pain, right? If we don't deal with things, if we keep them hidden, then they stay just as fresh. And so that's why you have people who are like, you know, sometimes I think about my mom, who's almost 80, who still talks about her trauma when she was like 5 or 6. Like sometimes it still stays fresh with people. So I like the idea of like giving these out. I'm also sort of very influenced by people like Felix Gonzalez Torres, and the idea of creating art outside of sort of commerce. Like what does it mean to sort of give things away? So these were always free for the taking. So this is the book I made. And so, right, so in the narrative, she's imagining her partner having an affair. And so the affair ends up actually being images of me and my very first lover having sex. I started sort of making erotica and documenting my sexuality since I was 25. And so, so in this image, we're having sex, but part of the narrative is, and I saw it clearly as if we were in the room with them. So she's imagining her partner having sex with someone, but her partner is I'm actually having sex as a guy in it. And this is the last time she's made an appearance. It was like 2015. So when Carlo invited me to be part of Uranus, I was like, I thought, oh, I guess I should do another Dolores, right? But I was like, it's so much work. Like the shaving and like this and that. And when I was young, I was sort of kind of androgynous, but as I got older, I sort of accepted kind of the privilege of like masculinity. And it was also sort of a reaction too. So I was like mugged in 2008, pretty violently. And my reaction to that was to grow a really long beard. Back before beards were popular. Back when beards were scary, actually. And I would always get stopped at airports. People would be scared of me on the train. Children thought I was Satan and jump. But I was like, I don't like, it's a lot of work. So I was just trying to figure out like what I could do. And then I realized that in the end, sort of comics are about telling a story. And I tried to figure out what story I wanted to tell. And one thing about being an artist is like people sometimes ask to collaborate or do things. And there's always sort of this sort of thing about like trading or exposure or whatever. But the beautiful thing, I think, is like when you're acknowledged and through money, right? Because it's like it's a way of showing respect. And before I even made anything, Carlo immediately paid me. And I was like, all right, this is real, I have to do it. And this was in November, right? And I remember asking Carlo, I'm like, when do I have to finish this by? And he's like, ideally by the end of the year. So I'm an extreme procrastinator. So in January 26th is when I started it. And so actually I think I skipped an image. Anyway, but in doing the comic, like I'm in constant communication with Carlo, and one of the things Carlo said is he wanted to make this sort of a more mainstream situation, and so I showed an image. So I sent this to Carlo as I was working on it, and said, "Is this too much?" Right? And so he's like, "Well, if you do that, then it's gonna have to go into like the 18 and over section, and it's not gonna do what he wanted to do." So I said, "Okay, so let me figure out how to fix it." So I basically put a crucifix over it and it's all sort of like, it tells a story. So this is the cover. So it's printed in black and white in the comic, but what I actually did was I decided to make, instead of making sort of like panels, I decided to just make one image, sort of as a collage, like as an art object. And so this is the cover. It's a little hard to see, but it's an open, like coffin, like or sarcophagus, really. And there's like a skeleton that's like clothed. And for me, like death is so Mexican. Like I just grew up with death, hearing stories about death. It's not something that I'm scared of. Like I'm pretty okay with the idea of death. So I thought it'd be a nice way to start. Right? So the narrative is basically me going to Merida to go on a trip and have some fun and visit my family. And so it says, I haven't been to Merida since before COVID-19 infected the world. And although there's a dot right there, that's actually not Merida, it's Cancun. I fly into Cancun and then take the bus to Merida. It's cheaper. He asked me to bring 2 bottles of poppers. I rented a room in the same hotel where we last met up. And that's actually a photograph from the hotel room. And that's the main cathedral, the main square. And so so the way Merida is set up is there's actually these sort of arches and sort of gates where only the white people lived inside the city, and all the indigenous people lived outside the walls. Now with what's happening is they're thinking about tearing those sort of gates down. In the same way we're like taking down sculptures of Christopher Columbus, right? And so one of the things that's happening in Mexico too is there's this sort of like femicide that's happening. And so there's a lot of protests. And so this is some graffiti on one of the walls at the entrance to the city. And it says femicide, and I'll translate it into English. It says femicides, were the cries of the people who are no longer here, right? So it's acknowledging sort of what's happening. Yucatan is where the 41 were sent to dig trenches and sweep floors. So I don't know if you know about the 41. There's actually a film now on Netflix. And so what happened in like the 30s, the police broke into a club or a bar or a social situation and arrested 41 gay men. There were actually 42 men in the space, but the 42nd person was married to the president's daughter. So that's why it's known as the 41 instead of the 42. And so they were actually exiled to Yucatan. And so Yucatan is really weird in that sense. It's a conservative city, but it's really gay. Like the first time I went, we were driving somewhere, and there was this huge billboard with a shirtless guy that said gay club. And I started cracking up and telling my mom, I'm like, they don't even do that shit in New York. Right? Like the most we get is like a rainbow flag. But we don't get a gay club outside. I found Merida changed. One of the things that's happening in Merida is that it's being sort of gentrified by outsiders. So there's a lot of like Americans, Canadians, French people that are going. Like I didn't want to go hang out with their American friends. Like I go to Mexico to hang out with Mexicans. And so because of gentrification, right? The gays have picked up all the bad habits of catfishing, ghosting, and general flakiness one finds on Grindr. Within the comic, there is this is where it starts. There is an exchange on Grindr between me and a person. And it says, I did get a nice BJ from a guy visiting from Mexico City. And then there's sort of the exchange between me and this person. So after all the work of smuggling poppers and finding a PrEP pill that didn't make me feel like shit, my buddy disappeared, right? And so this is an image of us having sex the year before. And I was left with two unopened bottles of poppers, which, like cocaine in New York City, is expensive and only available by delivery, which I think is really weird. But yeah, like a bottle of poppers in Merida costs like $30 US dollars. And you have to call someone and they have to deliver it to you, which is really strange, right? So not exactly the sexy time I was looking forward to. But I got to help my mom make jabali and visit my dad's grave. Jabali is a like wild boar, and had a beautiful time. This is actually a line for COVID testing. What I did not know is that I needed to take a PCR same-day test that cost $125 US dollars. And this is a line to get tested. And I could not leave the country without it. and returned a little more healed and whole, the way only a trip back home can make you feel. So that's me watching Paris is Burning on the airplane. And I think that's it. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm so happy to be able to see the images in color for the first time. It's really, really beautiful. And I'm really happy too to have the tradition of photo comics in my book because I grew up reading all sorts of types of comics, including the Barbie magazine comics that used to use photographs of Barbie and then put war balloons on them and stuff. Okay, and I'm so happy to have Jennifer Camper here with us. I want you all to check out the PBS documentary that features Jen called No Straight Lines, which is now streamed to PBS. Yeah, and I'm so happy to have Jen in the comic. She edited Juicy Mother, and I was in Juicy Mother 2, and that was the first ever thing I published that was about queerness. So I'm really grateful to Jen for many reasons, but especially that one. Thank you so much for being in the comic. Here is Jen Camper.
And yeah, the film that Carlo was talking about is a documentary. It's streaming on PBS until April, and there's flyers at the cash register that explain you can just get it on the PBS app for free and stream it. This is called What Your Furniture is Thinking. Your food is disgusting and you eat like a pig. I may be just a stupid lamp, but you need me in the dark. Whatever happened to those silk sheets? I want to fuck a chair. Why there will be no baseball team this spring. One shortstop skipped town and is wanted by the police. The catcher, the right fielder, and the other shortstop fell in love, and the bedroom door hasn't opened since December. The pitcher refuses to play until cheating is considered a viable, creative game strategy. The woman who plays first base says she can't be bothered unless everyone plays topless. The woman who plays second base found a more lucrative use for baseball bats. The woman on third base broke her arm in an unfortunate accident involving the senator's daughter and a stolen pickup truck. The left fielder says if the gods had wanted us to play baseball in the summer, they wouldn't have invented air conditioning, chocolate, and porn videos. This is called Childbearing. This was made for a queer horror comic anthology. So beware, it's going to be scary. Eva always knew she wanted a baby. She didn't care that she was single. She was determined to be a great mother. Her baby was beautiful. Nursing was difficult. But she had other mothers for support.
The baby would not sleep unless he was in Eva's bed. Of course, lots of babies are fussy eaters. And all babies are incredibly demanding. Children develop their own particular tastes as they get older. When baby was a little older, Eva tried dating again. Have you lived here long? A few years. It's a good neighborhood and near the park. If I don't humor him, he gets fussy. I just remembered I have an appointment. Eva grew more isolated. Even though she wasn't feeling well, Eva took good care of baby. Motherhood sometimes means making sacrifices. Give me cookies! Cookie! Mine! Eva cracked her head and died instead. Later, baby got hungry again. Baby always was a fussy. Unable to feed himself, baby grew weaker. Baby died soon after. Eventually, the smell caused the neighbors to complain. Everyone agreed she must have been a terrible mother. And this is called Feminist or Not, and it's an interactive cartoon, and you all get to yell out whether you think this is feminist or not in the next slides. Pink power tools, feminist or not?
Not.
Pop star in lingerie singing about female empowerment while twerking, feminist or not?
Nah.
Women smoking in the 1920s.
Hell yeah.
A female billionaire.
Boo.
Becoming a female billionaire while selling underclothing designed to reshape women's bodies. The woman who invented Spanx is a billionaire. The first female firefighter in town who says, I'm no feminist, I just need a job.
Yeah.
A food company telling women to love their bodies while selling weight loss products.
Run away.
Female senators against abortion. Lipstick with assertive names. A cosmetic company donating to breast cancer research while producing beauty products containing toxic carcinogens. Thongs and push-up bras with pro-female slogans. Female serial killers.
Yeah. More of those.
And this is called The Politics of Abortion, and it rhymes. Conservative politics serve the male who is rich, heterosexual, cisgender, and pale. So how does the right appeal to the others, making them vote against their own druthers. They champion causes that are false and intense, sans facts of science or plain common sense. Ban books, curb teachers, limit trans civil rights, trash immigrants, feminists, and all the non-whites. And loudly proclaim their dumb paradigm, abortion's an evil and immoral crime. But wait, Americans, by majority proportions, voice their support for legal abortions. No sweat, the right still gets votes with their pandering through voting obstructions and much gerrymandering. Your voting is 10 miles from public transportation, open one day only, show 5 forms of ID, and there's no mail-in ballots. Sure, unwanted pregnancies may still occur. A knocked-up mistress can cause quite a stir. But that's no trouble. It's easily explainable. For the rich, abortion is always obtainable. And those are my comics. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody coming. Please check out the Uranus Comics by the counter, and also I have some shirts that are similar to this one, which is an image of a Peruvian jaguar, and this will also help, support our work and keep it going.
And they're made by you.
That's right. I hand painted them.